For many years, I was stuck at the same speed. It didn't seem to matter what I did, I just couldn't ride any faster. But then I made one simple change and everything kind of fell into place. Back in the day when I was younger, fitter, and no doubt considerably better looking, I was a racing cyclist. Trouble was, I wasn't that fast. So in order to improve, I read Chris Carmichael's book, The Lance Armstrong Training System. Yes, I know, but at that time, he was the world's most famous cyclist. Long story short, Carmichael said that the key to winning races was to pedal at cadences of 90 revs per minute or higher. And that's precisely what I set out to do. For a while, it worked. My speed improved and I was finally beating the little children on broken tricycles that were taking part in the race just to see if they liked it. But then after a while, I noticed my performance started to plateau. And even worse, it didn't seem to matter how hard I pushed myself, I was actively slowing down. I felt like I was missing something, and it's been like that for about 10 years now. Now, as I've got older and I've stopped racing, I'm no longer quite so concerned about riding as fast as possible. But then again, I am only human, and I seriously doubt that there's a cyclist alive today that wouldn't like to improve their speed, even by a little bit. So earlier this year, I was chatting to my friend Tel, and he suggested that I tried something a little bit different. Essentially, he recommended that I tried slowing things down a little bit. So I reduced my cadence down to about 80 revs per minute, and after a while I noticed that my speed was indeed starting to increase. And this got me wondering, what was going on here? Is 90 revs per minute the ideal cadence, or was something else going on? My understanding is that it's all about the relationship between cadence and power. Cadence is simply the speed at which your legs turn the pedals over. It's measured in revolutions per minute, or RPMs, and at first glance it may seem that that is the key to speed, but that's really only half the story. The other half is the amount of force or power that you put through the pedals that really dictates how fast you can go. Power, on the other hand, is measured in watts, and it's a combination of the amount of force that you're able to put through the pedals plus how fast you're able to turn them. And I noticed that when I reduced my cadence down from 90 to 80 revolutions per minute, I was able to maintain the same power and sometimes even increase it. Now, of course, if you simply just reduce your cadence without doing anything else, you will just ride slower. In order to compensate, you'll also then need to change up or down a gear. And this is where my very handy 5 revs per minute rule of thumb comes in. Essentially, if you change your cadence by 5 revs, either faster or slower, you then need to change gear up or down to maintain the same speed. And then obviously, if you want to increase your speed, you'll have to change to an even higher gear. And this is where muscle physiology comes in. When you ride at relatively high cadences of say 90 revs per minute and above, you're using what they call your fast twitch muscle fibers. Now, these fibers are designed for very short, very powerful efforts, and they're fantastic for things like sprints and all-out efforts. But the trouble is, you can't use them for very long because they tire very, very quickly. By contrast, when you reduce your cadence down to around 80 revs per minute, you're using more of what they call your slow twitch muscle fibers. Now, these muscle fibers are designed more for endurance. So when you are pedaling at 80 revs per minute, you're saving energy and reducing fatigue over longer distances. Another thing to think about with cadence is your cardiovascular system, or basically how fit you are. Obviously, the faster you pedal, the higher your heart rate. And the higher your heart rate, the harder your cardiovascular system has to work to pump oxygen to those working muscles. And again, over time, this can lead to fatigue. But then if you slow your pedaling down a little bit, your heart rate will drop and your cardiovascular system won't need to work quite so hard. In other words, it's all about pacing yourself and mixing things up a bit. One of the biggest shifts when dropping your cadence is how your legs interact with the pedals. At higher cadences, you're relying on speed. Your legs are spinning fast, but you're putting less force through each pedal stroke. When you drop that down a bit, you're actually generating far more torque. Torque is the motivational force going through the pedals, and it's an essential part of the equation for speed. Now, although I probably wasn't thinking about it in quite those terms, I found it very, very useful to kind of think just a little bit about how much force I was putting through the pedals, particularly when I was on a flatter road and I just wanted to maintain a steady effort and slowly increase my speed. From my point of view, the improvements that I've seen in my rides over the past couple of weeks are basically down to efficiency. A few weeks ago, I was riding at higher cadences and using more of my cardiovascular fitness, which wasn't bad, but it could have obviously been a little bit better. And then when I reduced things down to the 80 revs per minute, I was basically relying more on my leg strength, which actually is pretty good. And I think it's trying to find that sweet spot between the cardiovascular fitness and your leg strength, and just trying to make it all as efficient as possible. So I suppose one of the questions that you're asking yourself now is, how can you do something similar? Well, I would suggest by experimenting with your cadence. And a great way to do this is with intervals. And counterintuitively, I would suggest starting off with some high speed cadence intervals. So pedaling maybe at around 100 or 110 revs per minute, and then alternating that with some slower cadences of maybe about 80 or 70 revs per minute. This will get your legs used to pedaling slow and fast efficiently. Another great way is to start off pedaling at a much lower cadence than you would expect, so maybe 50 or 60 revs per minute, and then slowly working your way up, trying to take a careful note of how your body feels at each stage. And this is a great way of finding where you feel best and a great way of maintaining a steady, constant power. Another great way is to ride on my turbo trainer at a steady 80 revs per minute and select a gear on my bike that allows me to ride at a constant power output of 200 watts. It's also interesting to reduce my cadence a little bit and increase my gearing to see how much more power I'm outputting, and more importantly, how long I can sustain it. One really important point to remember though is that there isn't one universal optimal cadence that's going to work for everyone, and what might work for me might not necessarily work for you. Each rider's optimal cadence is going to depend on a whole load of different things. So for instance, things like muscle composition. What's your ratio of slow twitch fibers to fast twitch fibers? Things like body mechanics, fitness levels, even the terrain that you're cycling on. If you're a sprinter, you may prefer the lower cadences, whereas if you're a more endurance cyclist, you might be better off with a higher cadence. The key is to experiment with all kinds of cadences and then take very careful note of things like speed, heart rate and perceived exertion. The goal here is to find the sweet spot that allows you to pedal efficiently without wasting energy. If you'd like to get the most out of your cycling, then please consider signing up for my free monthly newsletter for more exclusive content. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below and that will take you to the sign up page. In the meantime though, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next one.